Hey everyone, I'm Rick and thanks for joining me. Today we'll be looking at Douk Audio's newest mini amp, the Douk A5. And I'd like to thank Douk Audio for loaning me this review sample. Initially it was priced at $89, but it's currently on Amazon USA for $99. Tariffs. But you can still get it on Douk's website for $89 if you're outside of the US. We'll start with the specs today. The Douk A5, like most TPA 3255 based amps, is going to output around 65 watts per channel on an 8-ohm speaker with the included 32-volt power supply. And that'll bump up to around 100 watts per channel on 8-ohm speakers if you purchase an additional 48-volt power supply. The A5 has an excellent THD plus N at 0.002% and a signal-to-noise ratio at 114 dB. And Douk does suggest the A5 for 4 to 8-ohm speakers. Let's take a closer look. On the front side from the left, the A5's first standout feature is a knob that activates a high-pass filter and swings from 30 Hz up to 200 Hz. It clicks and feels super smooth. On the right, a volume and power knob, the same click and smoothness to that same knob. With venting on the sides, as well as the bottom. On the rear, from the left, only one set of single-ended RCA ins, followed by an auxiliary 3.5mm out, more on this later, a set of the small binding posts, and these are my least favorite, but I can understand why they use them. The chassis is small, and while I personally would have preferred a larger chassis to fit the more standard binding posts, I'm sure that would have brought the price up on this amplifier. And finally the DC input, which takes 24 to 48 volts in. On the top, a smoked glass cover with a little milled area here to help you remove the cover. And while the glass does look super clean, I really do wish it would have had a metal frame all the way around it with a couple of screw holes where they might have given you maybe some torque screws and include a little Allen wrench. That way you can secure that little window down. As it is right now, it's just free floating. And while I was bringing the amp in and out of my system a few times, I almost dropped that glass cover around 4 or 5 times. And I'm sure the glass is tempered, but it was nerve-wracking catching that glass in midair. On the inside, super clean. There's something about a matte black circuit board, super sexy. There's Rubicon and Nichicon electrolytic caps, as well as Aiyima film caps, some Mita inductors, and a pair of swappable 5532 op amps. And finally, over to the right of the op amps is the A5's second standout feature, a set of dip switches that control the internal LED lighting. Up is on, so towards the back of the amplifier, and down is off. And you'll see the markings here RGB, and you can turn them on in different combinations to give you up to 6 different colors, plus off, which is all the way down. And I'm using a wooden skewer. You're probably only getting around 15 volts to the op amps, but better safe than sorry. Although it's probably a better idea to adjust those while the unit is unplugged. Aesthetically, I love the color and finish, the smoked glass and the rounded edges of the chassis, but the front is just okay. I think the knobs are a little too large. Again, just my opinion. I would have liked a smaller volume knob, as well as an even smaller high-pass filter knob. Something like this. This would have made it easier to handle the volume knob if it was stacked above and below maybe a DAC or something else. And the smaller high-pass filter, because you really are not going to use it that very much. I think it's going to be one of those things where you set it and forget it. It also might have been a good option to move that knob over to the rear of the unit. Unless maybe you use it as an EQ to cut the bass for nighttime listening when everyone else in the home is asleep. It would also be cool if Douk could offer something like Fosi does with the different colored knobs here. It would be awesome if they can sell a kit with maybe these 3 sizes of knobs in, let's say, 4 different colors, so you can customize your unit a little further. Just something fun. Back to that 3.5mm aux. These are always confusing, and I always have to test to see what they really do. In the A5's case, it's a full range pre-out, and I really wish all audio companies would start labeling these better instead of just aux. Sometimes they're fixed line level outs, and other times they have a low pass filter. Anyways, I really like that this one is a full range pre-out. That means that you can connect a 3.5mm to RCA cable and shoot that over to a powered sub or a pair of powered subs. From there, you can gain match on your powered sub, and the A5's volume knob will control the output to your main speakers and your sub. Now back to that high pass filter. This one really is awesome if you need it. Sometimes you'll see some of these knobs that are bass boosts or tone controls, and the second that you turn them on or move them from 0, your soundstage collapses or you lose dynamics. And I can tell you that this is not the case with this high pass filter. My main speakers in my den go down to 32 Hz, and when I clicked the high pass filter on, I heard no change to the sound quality of my speakers. And then as I increased the high pass filter frequency, I heard the bass start to roll off. And I love that it didn't affect my soundstage imaging or anything at all. Or if it did, I couldn't hear it. Just awesome. And I think this hardware approach to high pass filters is better than some software DSP approaches, like the ones you see in some entry-level streamers like the Wimmer or Really products. Now I do love those streamers, but my experience has been the second I turn on their DSP features, my soundstage flattens and I lose dynamics. At least that's the case in my system. But the Douk A5 keeps everything intact. Now I personally wouldn't use this feature for my main speakers, although I did test that feature on those speakers because they're the most resolving ones I have and allow me to hear even tiny changes. Where I would definitely use that high pass filter would be on my GR Research XLS Encore two-way bookshelf speakers. Those have a 6.5-inch paper woofer, and while it does sound beautiful, it can't go very deep. It hits maybe 60-65 Hz. Bringing the high pass filter up to around 80 to 100 Hz and allowing a YAMO 8-inch sub to handle the lower frequencies really ups that setup's performance. The A5 did the same at my computer workstation with my Audio Engine P4 speakers. The A5 tamed the bass down a little bit and cleaned up the vocals, although I still need a small sub to complete that setup. Now the third standout feature of the Douk A5 is its post-filter feedback circuitry, or PFFB. This is a technique that's used to reduce distortion and keep frequency response more linear by removing the amp's low dependency, and I'll show you an example later. So when building a new system with the A5 or other amps with PFFB, you'll have one less variable to worry about. Now I wouldn't say that amps with this kind of circuit are going to sound more consistent across speakers. Speakers just sound different. You'll still have to find a pair of speakers with voicing that you like, because the PFFB doesn't do anything to change or correct the frequency response of a crossover. But if your drivers have some crazy impedance curves, well then yes, the PFFB is generally going to give you a more linear output. In my main system, that's really a non-issue, and I'll show you why. On my DIY Joseph Crow speakers, the highs are handled by an LCY K100 super tweeter. And here you can see the impedance graph. In my system they handle 10 kHz and above, and this tweeter only varies from 8 ohms at 10K up to 9 ohms at 20K and never goes above 12 ohms up to 50K. The next speaker is the mid-range, the GRS PT6825 8 ohm version, and as you can see, another super linear impedance. This speaker handles frequencies from 500 Hz to 10K and basically stays at 6.5 ohms the whole way. Finally, the woofers, the Dayton Audio DS315s, again 8 ohm versions. And these speakers handle 500 Hz down to around 32 in my bass cabinets. And here you can see that the impedance rises as the frequency gets lower, and it starts to rise at around 60 Hz and peaks to around 35 ohms in the high 20s, maybe 28-29 Hz. But in that area that does have a rise, there isn't any real music that I would hear changes in. Now of course, once all the impedances are measured together, you'll have a slight change, but generally speaking, any amp hooked up to those speakers sees a really easy to drive 7.2 ohms. But supposing we take a look at this $350 Tang Band full range driver. Here we have a rising impedance from 7 ohms at 300 Hz to around 35 ohms at 20K. Something like this might be more problematic. And another factor will be the crossover. A poorly designed crossover can make the impedance change pretty dramatically. So now let's do some comparisons on paper before I let you know what I heard in my system. Comparing some amps from Fosi and Aiyima, here's what we have. All of these use TPA 3255 chips. First from Fosi Audio, the BT28 Pro, coming in at $99, with an SNR of 108 decibels, no PFFB, but does have tone controls and Bluetooth. Next, the Fosi ZA3, coming in at $129, signal to noise at 106 decibels, no PFFB, but this one does take balanced and single-ended inputs. Then the Fosi V3, coming in at $89, with a signal to noise ratio of 110 decibels, and no PFFB. At this point for new buyers, I say this one is obsolete and just go with the A5. Next, the Fosi V3 monos at $140 each with the 48 volt power supplies, and you'll need 2 of these, 1 per channel. Signal to noise at 123 decibels. They do have PFFB, although no sub or high pass filter. That would have to be handled from your source, either with a sub out or a white cable, one to your amps, the other to the sub. Here you do have superior performance, but at triple the price. Onto Aiyima Audio, and we'll just look at their amps with PFFB. Currently they have 2 amplifiers. First the A70 with a signal to noise ratio at 116, with balanced and single-ended inputs, sub out and a 12 volt trigger. Again another solid option, but this one's at $200, twice the price of the A5. And then there's their new A80, and this one's super interesting. It's more of an integrated with a built-in DAC and other features as well, but again at $200, so double the price of the A5. So on paper, the A5 at $99 is the value leader. It gives you the best performance for your dollar. So on to what I heard. And I tested with 48 volt 5 amp power supplies. Comparing the Douk A5 to the Fosi Audio BT28 Pro, the Douk had a larger soundstage and better imaging. And the Fosi isn't bad at all, but things just expanded a little more with the A5. The vocals on the A5 are also more defined and a touch crisper. And as for the bass, here's where I couldn't tell a difference. It's pretty much the same. Both have good impact and control. Now comparing the Douk A5 to the Iota VX PA3, the PA3 is a 50 watt per channel at 8 ohms Class AB amplifier that can be bridged to mono for 100 watts at 8 ohms. And you'll be paying around $500 to get one in the US. I paid $1,000 to get a pair, and I usually use them as mono amplifiers, but for this comparison, I just use one in stereo. And here's where I was surprised. The Douk A5 is the closest that I've heard to the PA3 from a small Class D mini amp. I'd say the A5 is about 95% the sound quality of the PA3 for about a quarter of the price. The bass is still more impactful on the PA3, but the soundstage width and depth from the A5 is within millimeters of the PA3, and much better than I heard from the Fosi V3s. And honestly, if my PA3s were to go down again, I'd seriously consider them replacing them with an A5. And I'd love to see maybe some A5 monos come out, with maybe low pass and high pass filters on a separate preamp. That'd be very cool. All in all, the A5 is an awesome little amp. Is it the best amp out there? Of course not. In this hobby, if you can call it that, more times than not, more money does mean better performance. My Iota VX PA3 is still a superior amp, but at the A5's price point, I haven't heard anything better yet. And I can highly recommend this one. Now my final remarks are going to be about Douk Audio themselves, and I have one positive comment and one negative. First, the positive. I love that they're showing you real rated output power on their website, and I wish all companies would do this. Although I do wish they would also publish this on their Amazon page. And as for the negative comment, they still only offer their amps with a 32 volt power supply. And I think they have to catch up with everybody else and add an option for buying this amp with the 48 volt. The Knob Sound 48 volt 5 amp GAN break comes in at around $43 on Amazon. So it'd be cool if they can pair that with this unit instead of the 32 volt and maybe charge you another $20. But again, all in all, I think it's an awesome little amp. Well, that's it. That's all I have for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.